So, good afternoon and welcome to the 2024 Depression on College Campuses Conference. My name is Todd Sevig, and I serve as director of our student counseling center called Counseling and Psychological Services here at the University of Michigan, and I'm honored to be a co-chair with Dr. Srijan Sen and Dr. Lindsay Mortensen, and to work with the whole conference planning committee in presenting this conference. We hope that we have set the stage, set the table, set the environment for us all to learn together this afternoon and tomorrow. A couple quick logistical notes. After our keynote this afternoon, the workshops will begin at 2:15 on the second and fourth floor of this building. And at the end of each session, please remember to complete an evaluation, which you can access via a QR code posted in the room. Excuse me. As a committee, we go over all the feedback every year to ensure that this conference continues to meet the needs of practitioners, instructors, faculty, advocates, students, and leaders who come together every year to advance college student mental health on all of our campuses. I'd also like to express gratitude to our tireless conference organizers, Stephanie Salazar and crew, who have done an outstanding job in bringing us together and making all this happen smoothly. Before we begin our formal program today, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. The University of Michigan is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people. In 1817, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Bodewadmi nations made the largest single land transfer to the University of Michigan. This was ceded ceremonially as a gift through the treaty at the foot of the rapids so that their children could be educated. We acknowledge the language and use of the word gift in the original treaty. Gift entails a mutual relationship between treaty parties, respect, obligation on the part of the settlers. We advocate for indigenous struggles against ongoing settler colonization, and we all strive for a decolonized future. So today, we are gathered for this Depression on College Campuses conference, which has been running now for over 2 decades. It was the brainchild, the original idea, from Dr. John Graydon all those years ago. And the energy from that time has sustained us all in this present journey. This conference has always had a main energy point of bringing together different roles on our campuses: mental health practitioners, mental health researchers, faculty, staff, advisors, students, programmers, all with the goal of making a quilt and a blanket of support, of knowledge, and of transferring what we learn here to take home to all of our campuses. However, when the conference first began in 2002, and I was part of that original group, our world looked very different. The internet was still kind of new. The term social media did not exist, and many of today's undergraduate students were still a few years from being born. Our theme this year, A New Generation, highlights an important turning point, an important moment in which we find ourselves in 2024. Moments like these can both be a bit scary and unknown, yet also exciting and insightful as we journey together to advance student mental health. We all know that this generation of college students today has grown up with technology, with war, with conflict and terrorism, locally and globally, and in the recent past with the consequences of our world-changing pandemic. And they've grown up with a lifelong awareness of climate change, which has had an impact on their mental health. A recent survey of UM students through the Healthy Mind Study showed that many students agree with statements such as, "The future is frightening." and that people have failed to take care of the planet. And many students say they worry about climate change almost every single day. With this as a context point, I am so happy to introduce our opening keynote speaker, Dr. Michaela Zint, who is the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs at University of Michigan School for the Environment and Sustainability. A long-standing expert in climate education and environmentally responsible behaviors, she recently spearheaded an initiative to ensure all U of M graduates have competencies and skills to confront climate change, to take action in ways that are sustainable, transformative, and just. I've had the personal honor of talking and meeting with her and had a very meaningful time in one of her core sessions, and I could see and feel her passion for education, for students, and for this important work. The list of her achievements is long and comprehensive, but you actually want to hear from her, so I just want to highlight two things. She's widely published expert in this area and has developed all kinds of innovative new teaching methods and programs for all students. And she is also the Arthur F. Thurnau Professor, one of the highest faculty accolades offered by our university. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Michaela Zint.
Good afternoon. I so appreciate that lovely introduction and wish you a very warm welcome to the University of Michigan on this beautiful, gorgeous day. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you about the topic of climate anxiety. Climate anxiety and related stressors like eco-anxiety, ecological grief, solastalgia, and others are already affecting many students' mental health, as Todd just mentioned. Given the trajectory predicted by scientists, there's unfortunately no question in my mind that climate anxiety will be a major contributing factor to students' mental health, academic success, and overall well-being in the years to come. I would like to acknowledge my colleague, Dr. Michael, and student Taylor Valentine for helping me prepare this keynote. Our formal training is in sustainability education, climate change education, and in higher education. As part of our efforts to advance climate education at the University of Michigan and beyond, we have been increasingly interested in the topic of climate anxiety. While some levels of anxiety may indeed be helpful in motivating individuals to engage in mitigation and adaptation actions, what our students are feeling appears to stand in the way of their development as climate leaders, and thus in the way of an important goal that all universities should have at this time, given the urgent nature of our climate crisis. Today, I will provide an overview of key insights of what I have learned over the past years so that you will be able to draw on this information to do what you can to bring about the societal transformation that we so desperately need. Let me also share that we are not mental health experts. I do want to share, however, that I personally have been diagnosed with anxiety and depression in the past, and it is thanks to professionals like you that I stand before you today. Thank you so much for what you do. Before I begin, let me also give you a heads up. I've prepared a set of relatively extensive and rich, i.e. ambitious slides, partly so that you'll be able to refer to them in the future. In other words, we'll make them available to you, and please don't worry about the details. I could spend a lot of time on each one, but I will cover them as quickly as possible so that we may have some time for Q&A at the end. As I just alluded to, the goals of my presentation are to share information to allow you to better support our students to become climate leaders by helping them learn about how to manage their own and others' climate anxiety, providing you with the opportunity to reflect on your own positionality within this context, and to set the stage for what I hope will ultimately result in a collaborative national effort. Can I say woohoo? Yes? Collaboration? Woohoo. Thank you. I'll begin by sharing a bit more information about why I became interested in the topic of climate anxiety specifically, and why I suspect it may matter to you as well. But I'll spend the bulk of the time covering a set of topics that I believe are important for you to know from this growing body of scholarship. This will be followed by some examples of what select universities are doing to support their students, and ideas again for how we might be able to collaborate. There'll also be some concluding remarks, and I hope some time for questions, as well as a request to fill out an evaluation on this keynote. So what motivated me? As an associate dean of an environmental program, as well as a scholar and a leader behind U of M's effort to advance climate education across our institution, I've become increasingly aware of students' climate anxiety. In other words, their chronic fear of environmental doom, typically accompanied by despair and hopelessness. Given that we are well on our way to cross most of the planetary boundaries that have ensured the sustainability of our planet's systems, including with regards to greenhouse gas emissions, it is really not surprising that students are distressed by what they're learning about climate change. And it is, in fact, an appropriate response to a very real threat. It is also not surprising that instructors in various forms of media focus on the doom and gloom surrounding these challenges. The common assumption by instructors, for example, is that we can scare individuals into action. But you know, better than even I know, that this idea has many limitations, and that instead it is critical that we empower our students, that we increase, for example, their agency and efficacy, the belief that they can make a difference on their own, and importantly, by working with others. I have come to the recognition that we will not succeed in empowering our students to be climate leaders without learning how to manage their climate anxiety. This is essential because all jobs, including ours, are increasingly becoming climate jobs. Lastly, as I mentioned earlier, I've had personal experiences with anxiety and depression, and I was curious about how what I learned through that process from individuals like yourself could also apply to climate anxiety. Now that I've shared a bit of what led me to become interested in the topic, let me speculate about why you might be interested in the topic as well. But before I do, just take a minute to reflect on why this topic might matter to you. For one, I suspect you, like me, have personal reasons. I suspect many of you are experiencing climate anxiety and are interested in learning what strategies might help you. As participants in this conference, I also thought of 3 professional reasons that I'll address next. And of course, I would be eager to hear at the end what you think I might have missed. First, I suspect your interest might be pragmatic. What do I mean by this? As mental health professionals, headlines such as these have likely caught your eye, and you have become curious to learn more in response. Alternatively, students may have already reached out to you for help with their climate anxiety, or you may have decided or been asked to develop suitable programs for your students. In fact, let's find out. By a show of hands, how many of you have already counseled individual students on their experience with climate anxiety, or have developed relevant programming on your campus? Hi, we look around. Great. As you can see, consistent with these hands, research tells us that climate anxiety is an increasingly prevalent form of distress among our students. If possible, again, time permitting, please share your experiences from your campus and your resources as part of the Q&A. I suspect many of you also have a strategic interest in climate anxiety. This is because you already know that climate change will be a major threat to human health and thus well-being. You may be already aware of the many negative physical health outcomes that are already occurring as a result of climate change, as illustrated by this figure. These physical health outcomes are the result of both acute onset events attributed to climate change, such as extreme weather, floods, and wildfires, as well as slower, gradual changes, such as droughts and the spread of diseases. I believe what makes this generation of students different from prior generations, as alluded to by Todd, is that they're not only aware of these impacts of climate change on human and other species' physical health, but that many already have direct experience with these impacts. Students in our region, for example, have had respiratory challenges as a result of the smoke of the extensive wildfires in Canada last year. Even more relevant from a strategic perspective, given your particular profession, are the predicted consequences for mental health as a result of climate change. This 2022 article by Crandon et al. Provides some specific examples of how select climate change impacts, such as increased temperatures and extreme weather events, can have direct effects on mental health. Personally, I found just the relatively long list associated with these two impacts quite revealing. I was also intrigued to learn, for example, how increased temperatures can affect those taking medications such as antidepressants. These mental health consequences are aspects that I believe our students would benefit from having a greater awareness of, not only to normalize what they are experiencing, but also to protect them, given that many of them, as we know, are already on antidepressants. A final reason you, like me, may be interested in climate change and climate change anxiety may be a moral one. As you know from your own experience, physical and mental health impacts are not distributed equally. Many people are more vulnerable due to systemic and structural factors. This slide, for example, shows how extreme heat affects low SES and racially minoritized communities in Boston, much more so than their affluent counterparts. In other words, those more vulnerable are also often the ones who have contributed the least to greenhouse gas emissions. This is why the current population of students is not just calling for addressing the climate crisis, but also the climate justice crisis. They are extremely frustrated with such inequities, and appropriately so. Let me now switch from the topic of what I suspect you, like me, are interested in learning about, climate anxiety, and turn to a list of key insights that we hope you will find helpful to your efforts as mental health professionals, and I will address each of these in turn. It is also important to note that, first, the points I'm about to share with you are based on scholarly research. As you can see, regardless of the database research, the literature on climate anxiety is growing very rapidly. But as you can also tell, it is a relatively recent body of work, and thus there's still much to learn. It is important to keep this in mind as you listen about what I have to say. So while this particular talk focuses on climate anxiety, it is important for you to know that climate change can result in a range of emotions, as illustrated through this climate emotions wheel. These emotions can consist of fear, including as a result of feeling powerlessness, sadness, including guilt about being complicit in contributing to climate change, and anger, including outrage about the lack of action by governments. At the same time, in some instances, students may also experience positive emotions, which I will turn to toward the end of this presentation. So what is climate anxiety? There is no single accepted definition of this phenomenon. Here's one definition that we developed, consistent with our new generation of students. We asked ChatGPT to generate this definition on the basis of two very commonly used ones, one by the American Psychology Association. We like this definition because it captures the key themes identified in the literature, such as emotional, cognitive, and physiological symptoms that can manifest as a result of climate anxiety and as a result impact daily functioning, the stress and fear associated with the future due to climate change, and concern about the risks and losses associated with climate change. So just how pervasive is climate anxiety? This question is challenging to address because climate anxiety has been measured in a variety of ways. The first set of results that I'm showing in the middle column are from an annual study by the APA that measures Americans' top 10 sources of stress. Note that last year, half of the respondents identified climate anxiety as a significant source of stress. Another study, in the remaining column, completed also last year, reported that because of global warming, 9% of Americans felt down, depressed, or hopeless, and 8% reported being interested in counseling. It is also important to note that, as is the case with climate change impacts, different populations experience climate anxiety differently. The same Yale study I mentioned on the previous slide found that overall 3% of the US population met the criteria for clinically diagnosable climate anxiety on the basis of using the Generalized Anxiety Disorder Scale. While there were no differences in gender, race played a relatively large role, with, for example, Hispanic and Latino adults experiencing far higher levels of climate anxiety when compared to Black and white Americans. Let me see if I can point that. Here's the Latino, and then here is Black and white. You can also see that our students' level of climate anxiety are relatively high when compared to, for example, baby boomers. The reason I wanted to show you this particular slide is because, contrary to a lot of media coverage, these data clearly suggest that climate anxiety is not just a white phenomenon. Along these lines, here are results from another study, again suggesting differences in levels of climate anxiety, here among young people ages 16 to 25 across 10 countries. Note that 49% of youth in the Philippines, which is the country predicted to be most negatively affected by climate change, are worried about it. Much more than, for example, the 19% in the USA. Oops. There we go. I'm not aware of any similar studies like these for US college students, but based on the findings of these studies, it is likely that there are differences among our students. Most likely, those from most vulnerable communities are experiencing the highest level of climate anxiety. Don't be frightened. This model is actually, I think, extremely helpful, and I'll walk you through it. This is a model Michaela developed to illustrate how individuals are likely to develop climate anxiety, as well as cope and learn to live with the climate crisis. The model starts on the far left with helping us understand how individuals may move from not knowing about the climate crisis at all to shock and possibly trauma. The middle part of the model then suggests that individuals move into a phase of anxiety and depression, during which they will hopefully go through various forms of coping, including by engaging in actions to directly address the climate crisis, grieving and other emotions in light of actual and perceived losses they're experiencing, distancing, which likely includes self-care practices, as well as avoidance of difficult emotions such as grief. The model also predicts that if individuals do not engage in these forms of coping, adjustments will be more difficult and may result in burnout. The aim, as suggested by the author, is to transition individuals to the far right of this model, where they're able to accept and live with the crisis. Consistent with what I've experienced myself, this is a stage where needs for action, grieving, and distance remain, but their emphasis changes. Action is less focused on manic forms of action and more on skills and consciousness. Grieving is lessened, and other emotions gain space, including positive ones. Similarly, self-care takes on a greater focus, though various kinds of distancing are still needed. Again, I shared this model with you because I think it can help us understand and guide the approaches we take with students as part of a holistic approach to helping them cope and live with the climate crisis. I thought you also might find the recommendations from this article of interest. These authors offer very concrete guidance, consistent with the model I just showed you, in terms of highlighting the need to help individuals cope and live with the climate crisis, through, for example, developing resilience and taking individual and collective actions. In addition, however, this article also highlights the value of connections, be it with nature or as a result of social interactions. Moreover, this article highlights the importance of self-care and learning by mental health professionals so that they can best support their clients. Next, I want to switch to a subject of hope. Hope is receiving a lot of attention within the context of this body of literature, as well as by popular media. I suspect you know a lot about the importance of hope in terms of generalized anxiety and depression, and would be eager to learn about your perspectives as part of the Q&A. What we know from the climate anxiety literature is that it's important to promote certain types of hope. Two types of hope, for example, that we do not want to promote in the context of climate change is false hope, which is a hope that focuses on exclusively, for example, on possibly infeasible technical solutions. Or passive hope, in which case individuals look to others to solve the climate crisis. So what do we want to do instead? We want to promote active or action-oriented hope by helping individuals develop a vision of the future they would like to strive for and helping them determine how best to achieve that vision. One last key point I want to make before turning to the topic of higher education's response to climate anxiety is that the press, and even many in the literature, tend to focus on climate anxiety as solely an individual's mental health challenge, without highlighting that it is powerful individuals and interests who are ultimately the ones who are responsible for what is, in fact, a rational response by individuals to the very real threats posed by climate change. Just like gaslighting is a common technique in abusive relationships with significant mental health impacts on the victim, so is what Verley calls greenhouse gaslighting, an attempt to offload the emotional burden on those least responsible and to further prevent collective action. Examples of this are abundant in the media, like the quote here from former President Trump. When responsible actors downplay climate risks, deny accountability, and dismiss individuals' concerns. It is important that we all combat greenhouse gaslighting. We can acknowledge students' concerns and how our emotions are intentionally being manipulated by powerful actors to serve their own goals. And we can work to advance community resilience, including through climate action. So let me now turn to some examples of what higher education institutions are doing to support their students. And I'm highlighting three: the University of British Columbia's efforts, Portland Community College, and our own here at the University of Michigan. We were particularly impressed by what we learned about UBC's efforts. What makes UBC stands out is that it has set up a climate well-being hub through which the university has offered a series of relevant events on a range of appropriate topics. A climate emergency response plan. 3 of the priorities in this plan are directly relevant to climate anxiety. As you can also see on the far right, UBC has an excellent set of introductory resources to learn about different aspects of climate anxiety that I can highly recommend to you. Another impressive initiative by UBC is its Sustainability Scholars Program. This program funds students, including from minoritized groups, to conduct research on a range of sustainability, including climate anxiety topics, like the ones on this slide. We have found all of these very informative, including the report on potential interventions to address climate grief, which is in the bottom right. Another leading institution, thanks to the efforts of a campus librarian, Roberta Richards, let us not forget all the difference that a single individual can make, is Portland Community College. As a result of Roberta's efforts, Portland Community College has one of the most comprehensive and up-to-date list of resources on the topic of climate anxiety. Similar to UBC, Portland Community College has offered a series of workshops and events to enable all members of the community to learn about climate anxiety. Unlike UBC, for example, PCC has also developed resources for faculty to help support them in becoming more effective climate educators. We were also impressed to learn that PCC has offered funding for members of its community to enroll in climate anxiety workshops that are offered by external experts. For example, PCC's mental health professionals had the opportunity to obtain fellowships to attend a professional development by Dr. Doherty, specifically designed for mental health professionals. Let me now turn to the University of Michigan. We know that support groups and workshops can be an important way for students to find community and to learn about climate change in ways that they appreciate and welcome. Accordingly, our Counseling and Psychological Services, or CAPS, offered a 10-week therapy group, one we're proud to have highlighted among those by other higher education institutions featured in the Washington Post article. As Todd alluded to, we've also begun to measure climate anxiety among our students. Results from our Healthy Minds study this past fall suggest that while the majority of students are not yet troubled by climate change, 40% report feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge because of climate change. 24% felt down, depressed, or hopeless. 22% were not able to stop or control worrying about climate change. And 12% had little interest or pleasure in doing things because of climate change. Another effort we're currently engaging in, that I'm specifically involved in with my students, is a co-designed university-wide event entitled Leadership for Turning Climate Anxiety into Action that will take place in just a few weeks. As part of this event, we will getting our community together and get their input on a series of resources we're currently developing, including guidance for individuals on how to manage their own anxiety, for faculty to support their efforts on what we have termed emotion-informed climate education, and how to promote appropriate types of hope, among other topics. We'll also be announcing the winners of an art competition on the topic, which is another way that individuals and communities have found to reflect and process their climate emotions. Art can be a very powerful tool. As mentioned earlier, preliminary research suggests that engaging individuals, and particularly engaging them in collective actions versus just individual actions, is a powerful way to address climate change in a way that supports coping, living with, and actually addressing the crisis. In light of this, we have developed a massive open online course, or MOOC, that may also be of interest to you and your students, because it is focused directly on what climate mitigation and adaptation actions students can actually engage in a way that has been proven to be effective. And we have opportunities across our campus and in our community through which students can connect with like-minded individuals. If you have not already done so, I encourage you to contact your campus sustainability leaders to identify suitable options you can promote among your students. Let me now switch to my final topic before my concluding remarks. This map illustrates the many institutions represented by all of you here today. Imagine what we could accomplish if we could collaborate with each other. So here's some of my ideas, and I look forward to hearing yours. By collaborating, we can probably develop a very effective grant proposal, not only to help us measure climate anxiety across all of our institutions, but to also test out therapies and interventions about which we currently have relatively limited knowledge, Very few of these have actually been evaluated to determine their effectiveness up to this point. We could also jointly develop and share resources. As somebody working on this for the past 2 years, I sure would appreciate some more help. It's a challenging topic to develop good programs on. And we could advocate for support for all of you, who will undoubtedly experience more requests to provide what has been termed climate-aware therapy. My final remarks focus on the importance of helping our students envision an alternative future, one that is not apocalyptic as typically portrayed in the media and in movies, but one that could bring about a more sustainable and just future. Some climate anxiety scholars argue that if we do not do so, the doom and gloom visions our students currently hold will turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy. With that, I'd like to thank you for attention, and I would like to open it up for questions and comments, though I would love to in particular learn more about your thoughts about these particular questions. Thank you. I'm also happy to go back to any of the slides that I went over, I realized very quickly, and again, they'll be shared with you so you can look at them in detail. We have 2 microphones up here, and so I'm hoping you will come up to these microphones and share your thoughts. Questions? Here we go.
Thank you for a really stimulating presentation. I'm Dr. Jeannie Manesi, and I spent most of my career at the University of California. I went back to where my roots are post-retirement and live in Kauai. But I'm wondering, because in Hawaii, of course, preservation, climate, the land is the aina, is very important to us, and we just had that recent climate, what I would call a climate tragedy and disaster with Lahaina and the fires. And so I'm wondering how you weave, because I do think they're very related, climate tragedies and climate disasters with climate anxiety, because all those things as a psychologist require healing, and I think the pathway is these community-based prevention interventions and post-tragedy interventions. That's my question to you.
That's a big question. So we do know that you're asking the question, I believe, please stay. You're asking the question of both acute events, an acute disaster, like the fire that you experienced, and you're also talking about the chronic climate anxiety situation. And all I can say is that we know that these acute events, and you probably know better than me, cause PTSD, and it needs to be addressed. But at the same time, the climate anxiety also needs to be addressed, right? Because it's a long-term phenomena that you need to address. And what I found disturbing in the literature, and I hinted at it very briefly, is that most of the climate anxiety literature focuses on whites. And it says it's a white phenomenon only, it's a white problem, which in my mind maybe justifies more mental health support for whites. And what I tried to highlight in my presentation, that it's actually, again, those most vulnerable that experience the highest level of climate anxiety as well, which says that they should also get more support.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And all the best for your community.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I'm Chris Frank. I'm an addiction medicine doctor here at the university, and I'm really interested in the way students handle anxiety and difficult emotions in general. And I wonder if you have anything that you can share, any practical information that you have come to from your looking at this, approaches that are good for students in the way that they might handle difficult emotions, whether it's about climate anxiety or about any of the other things that are getting to them. I was sort of struck by the last question, you know, because there's obviously there are all of these acute climate events that really do trigger a very appropriate trauma response, and then there's all of this anxiety. Sometimes it's kind of out of proportion to the acute threat, and I'm curious about how you think about that.
So one of the things that I have really started to reflect on, so one of my strengths, I think, as an academic, and all of us are trained as academics, and we're trained to think, have very good thinking skills and cognitive skills, and the rest of the academics who are not you, who have the professional background that you do, are not really equipped to deal with students' emotions. We don't typically talk about emotions. And we see that currently as well with the crisis in Israel and Gaza. Our students have a lot of emotions, and appropriately so, on these topics, and we're not really prepared to address them. So I'm an associate dean, for example, and I've pleaded with my faculty to please have conversations on these topics with their students, and they're just too scared to do so. I mean, they, of course, as an academic, and professors won't admit that, but that appears to be the case. They are frightened because they don't know how to deal with these emotions. So I want to first say, in response to your question, that I think it's very important that we equip our faculty and our staff who engage with students to learn the appropriate mechanisms to help students identify their emotions, normalize their emotions, have conversations about these emotions, and then at the same time also give them hope, appropriate types of hope, and connect them with, ideally, communities on their campuses and beyond that they can engage with, where they feel like there's others. They're not the only ones that are facing these emotions, there's many others. And then they can work together to actually solve a problem. So there was a recent study that said the most empowering experiences for students do not come through messages, which is no surprise, but through actually engaging in joint mitigation and adaptation actions together. And as a result, they're feeling more hopeful and their anxiety is reduced. I also pulled this slide up again because it has like a whole list of fostering students' resilience. But that would be my summary response to your question, and I hope it answered it. Yes?
Hi, my name is Dr. Allison Smith. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Student Health and Wellness at the Louisiana Board of Regents, where in Louisiana we have really great food, not so great climate,
Right.
where our Gulf Coast is currently slipping into the Gulf of Mexico every day.
Yeah.
One of my questions was, it sparked the question when you mentioned about the language around climate anxiety being for white people. Have you all considered, because as I'm sitting through the presentation, which the title alone piqued my interest, sitting through the presentation, I'm like, wait, I've heard a lot of these things before, but it was in a different language as opposed to climate justice. I've always heard it and seen work around as environmental racism. So have you all looked at any connections there or worked with any scholars, maybe in Black and brown communities that are doing work around environmental racism, its effects, so that it is largely so coming from Black and brown communities that tend to be affected by like power plants and like cancer alleys where it's the random thing in the county or parish where we are that everybody has all of these horrible health conditions. Have you all looked at any linkages between that?
So I'm not 100% certain I understand the question, so let me give it a go. We have here in my own school, we have an environmental justice group that has long studied, is one of the founding fathers, has been here on environmental racism and environmental inequalities and injustices. So that topic has a lot of scholars that focus on it. However, I have not found those scholars to focus on the anxiety element of this challenge that we face. And what I was trying to highlight is it just hasn't gotten the attention in that body of literature that I'm aware of. And I think it's in part because the scholars and the press have framed this issue so much as it's a white person's problem. It's the privileged people that get to worry about it. But no, it's actually those most affected that, appropriately so, are also most worried. So it's actually really not a theme in the literature, which is partly why I chose it as a key point to highlight, that this should be a topic that Hispanic and Black and Brown people receive special attention that they're currently not receiving.
I'll say that's exactly what I was thinking about, because for me, my background is in prevention, things like that. It reminded me of the war on drugs in Black and Brown communities versus the opioid crisis, which was largely portrayed as a particularly suburban white women's issue. So that kind of piece, but are there any plans to work further with the environmental justice folks that you all?
So first of all, thank you for giving me the analogy with the opioid crisis and so on. I really, really appreciate it. I would say it's exactly the same.
Gotcha.
Only it hasn't yet been recognized in this body of work that I know of. So yes, we will, this event that I told you about at this conference that we have coming up will have a big justice focus. And so I hope that that will stimulate some research moving forward. I think at this point, we're just on the cusp of even learning that no, this isn't just a white phenomena.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, excuse me. My name is Amanda Reese. I am a staff member at the University of Michigan, and I work in Wolverine Wellness as a wellness coach. I see students one-on-one for well-being issues. So climate anxiety and climate grief is something that I see students for. I think this list is something that we kind of also have in our office, and a lot of the conversations that I have with students are often around not feeling like they're seeing a change, like their confidence, that like when they're motivated for a goal, often it's that they can see progress. And so if they're not able to see that what they're doing is making a difference, it helps them, I think, feel more hopeless. So I'm curious if you have any suggestions for how to advise
Address
students
that.
to see the impact of their effort.
So one technique, thank you, and please stay so that I know if I answered your question. So one technique that we know is extremely powerful is stories. So if you cannot provide an experience, an actual experience through which students can be empowered, because we can't control experiences, right? We might have a living lab experience, but it fails. You know, students come up with ideas of how to change the campus and nothing happens. That can actually have a negative effect, right? So that's something that one really has to think about. But we know stories can be very powerful. So if you can share stories of environmental or climate leaders that have brought about certain changes, and especially if those stories are of students like them, it makes a big difference. So one of the things that I would love to see at our university is to have us interview students that have made a difference. We have many of those, and feature them and share their stories, and have events where students can engage with those individuals, and that, the research tells us, should be very empowering.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example. I coach a lot of students in trying to quit vaping, and something that I think helps them the most is that when they see other people that are like them that have done it. So yeah, I would love to see those.
Thank you for sharing that analogy with me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Taylor Banks. I'm a student member of one of the advocacy teams through the Eisenberg Family Depression Center's peer-to-peer program. I have less of a question and more of just a request to see one of the slides.
Sure.
It was about the effects of climate change on mental health, the one with the table and the long list.
Hold on, I'm trying to get back there. And again, you will have those slides and this article. Also the slides, I included the reference, and there's direct links to every single reference, so it should make it really easy for you to access. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi. Very short. Hi, I'm Emily Jones. I'm a graduate student at West Liberty University. And I was actually kind of surprised to see that we were the only school from West Virginia. And so I sort of have two different statements and a question. A lot of our focus in clinical psychology and our location is focusing on treating rural populations because there's a whole different vernacular and way of approaching individuals from these rural communities. There's a lot of distrust there and lack of resources and things like that. So I guess my first question is, have there been any studies done or research or analysis that has been done to see any difference in climate anxiety between rural populations and more urban populations?
I am not aware of such a study, but I think that's a very interesting question, and I can see why there would be differences.
And then that sort of leads into my potential statement for, collaboration, potentially. Because West Virginia obviously has historically and currently has the massive mining industry, which has been well known to produce, countless adverse health effects, climate effects. And I think studying that and gaining greater insight into climate anxiety within rural populations, specifically in the context of West Virginia, and how the mining industry, that is such a massive piece of our economy, how that has impacted climate anxiety in our region.
I am sure there's work. I'm not aware of it, but I would be surprised if there wasn't. It may be found under the work, I used earlier the term climate anxiety here because that's the popular one, but there's eco-anxiety, eco-grief, solstalgia, which is about the grief associated with the loss of the natural world that you've grown up in and the quality it once had and it no longer does. So I would think that if you use some of those different terminologies, I'm sure you will come up across something that's relevant.
I'd be very interested in seeing the influence of climate anxiety in specifically the anxiety experiences and mental health struggles of people in rural West Virginia.
I think that's an excellent question. Unfortunately, again, this is a very nascent field, and there really haven't been that many studies. And I always hate it, I don't know about you, when scholars say, we need more studies.
Yeah.
It's very
it's
very self-serving, and we all know it. But in this case, it actually is true. And I'm not advocating necessarily for money for me. I'm just saying in general, this is an understudied area. And I'm super excited. I really meant what I said about the collaboration. So if any of you, I really hope that you will reach out. I created this QR code. You can pull it up via your phones. And I really think we could make a difference. But given the urgency, we need to work together. So please, by all means, fill that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me do one more, and then I'm going to argue for a short exercise. Okay. Yes?
Thank you. My name is Jonathan. I'm a doctoral student in counseling at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And one of my concentrations is working with Latina population. And I know you described that one of the most affected groups are Latinos and Hispanics. And so understanding social locations and that this is predominantly a white climate anxiety kind of issue, and that's the narrative around that. Are there any risk factors to look for in working with people in the Latina population that might trigger that this isn't just regular anxiety, this is actually climate anxiety, and we may not be aware of that?
So we don't, again, I wanted to make this point because it's one that's missing in the literature for the most part, that it's actually Latinos and then to a far lesser extent actually black and brown, but still higher than white phenomenon. So I'm not a mental professional like you, so I can't really answer your question. I can only say a little bit about why that might be. And so nobody actually knows why the percentages are so high in that national study, but people are speculating. And one of them is because many of the individuals in the food industry, directly affected by intense heat are Latinos working in the fields, right? And so that's one of the reasons why behind that, but also because many Latinos, this is not me, I'm just sharing what's been shared in the conversations, is that a lot of them are immigrants from South America, and which is much harder hit by climate change. And so they've already seen the effects to much higher levels than maybe folks here. So I can only give you the reasons. I cannot tell you what specifically to look for, et cetera. We're still even just developing accurate measures for measuring climate anxiety. So currently we don't even have that yet.
Appreciate you.
Yeah. So with that, we have a few minutes, so I'm suggesting we do an activity. So, okay, here's what we're gonna do. And I need a quick volunteer. Todd? Okay. So you're gonna pair up with somebody, so find somebody that you can sit next to, engage with, and you're gonna do, the first question is gonna be, when you think about climate change, what makes you scared about the future? And the way we're gonna do that is, Todd, come over here. So you're gonna say, so I'm gonna say, Todd, when you think about climate change, what makes you scared about the future?
My kids won't have a world to enjoy.
Thank you. What makes you scared about the future? He didn't know I was gonna do this.
That people won't have a meaningful life.
Awesome. Thank you. What makes you scared about the future with climate change? It's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Todd. Yeah. So what we're going to do is you see the repeat question. You're going to just say thank you and give that person to reflect a little bit more on this question. And then we're going to switch it when I tell you, and I'm going to ask you the other question, okay? All right. Thank you, Todd. Sorry to put you on the spot. All right, you ready? So pick a person that starts the questioning. When you think about climate change, what makes you scared about the future? Okay, so now we're going to switch to another question, same process, where one of you starts asking the question and says thank you, repeats the question, says thank you, you got it, right? And the next question is, within the context of climate change, what gives you hope for the future? Go. Okay, let's switch partners. So the other partner gets to ask the question about what gives you hopes for the future. Okay, in the interest of time, we're going to call it a wrap. I've done this exercise now with a range of different students, different groups, and I've found it resulted in similar wonderful interactions as seem to be the case here. So it's just a small type of activity, an idea that might be suitable for one of your contexts. So with that, I thank you so much, again, for inviting me, for letting me speak to you about this topic, for being understanding, since I'm not a mental health professional. Thank you again for what you do for individuals like myself, so we can live our life to the fullest. And it's been a pleasure, and I hope to look forward to working with some of you. And please don't forget to fill out the evaluation of the keynote. Thank you very much.